how we're managing forests here, and you will see we have a lot of in common. And I hope you enjoyed a little the outside. This is now a 18 minutes lecture, and afterwards there's gonna be food. So yeah, I hope you enjoy, and I welcome Mr. Spatev here to us from the university, and we're really happy for having him. Thank you. Applause, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Nele. So it's a real pleasure for me to be here. As you know, I'm not only a professor here at the university, I'm also in charge for internationalization for the whole university. So I closely work together with Matthias Barth, who was here, and we are at the moment writing an internationalization strategy for the university. So that's important, but my field of interest and expertise and my teaching is silviculture and applied silviculture. So I will talk to you about forest management in Germany. It will be a kind of introduction into the topic. We have time enough to discuss. After the lecture, I will talk maybe 50 or 60 minutes, but not more. And then we can discuss some issues. So you know where we are. Eberswalde is in Brandenburg, so in the northeast of Germany. We are a special landscape here. We were shaped by the glaciers in the past, and we are one of the most vulnerable areas in Germany with respect to climate change. Yeah? So I often say we have a lot of lakes. We are rich in lakes, but we lack precipitation here in the area. Okay, Eberswalde in the northeast, but I'm not from the northeast. I came to Eberswalde 15 years ago. I'm from the Black Forest. And I heard you will visit Freiburg. So I studied in Freiburg at Freiburg University in the 1980s. So I'm quite old, as you can imagine. And I come from the Black Forest. It's a beautiful landscape in the border or at the border to France and Switzerland. And you may imagine my favorite hobbies are hiking and climbing mountains. So I very often travel to Austria and Switzerland and countries like Nepal, for example. Okay, I came here in 2006, but I worked with the Forest Administration of Baden-Württemberg. And I also had a 3-year stay financed by the German Academic Exchange Service in Brazil. So I worked in South Brazil at a university, and I studied a little bit the tropical forest and also the plantation forest sector, yeah, to bring in some international forest experience here for the study programs. But let us start, ladies and gentlemen. German forestry is, of course, a huge topic. I want to start with this picture because we are in a kind of crisis, a forestry crisis or a forest crisis in Germany. You have heard we have several areas in the center of Germany where we have large damaged areas, especially of spruce monoculture forest ecosystems. This is from the Harz Mountains, where you can see dead spruces, and we have these landscapes in the Thüringer Wald, we have it in the Sauerland area in Western Germany. And we are asking ourselves, are our forests, or at least some forest ecosystems, at a kind of tipping point? So that there is a danger that these forests might shift into an alternate state. Yeah? So a huge problem, and we have to cope with this. Some figures on German forests. I will not go into many figures and describe statistics. One thing is important. Germany has a percentage of 50 in terms of private forests. So we are a private forest country, 50%, and we have 30% of forest cover. That is something you may know. So we are a medium forest cover country. Not like Scandinavia with 50 and 60%, or Brazil with 60%, or low forest cover countries such as the Mediterranean or the countries in the arid zones. We have a lot of trees at the moment which are slightly damaged. So they show high crown transparency. That is what we monitor in the Forest Health Survey every year. And all the major tree species, ladies and gentlemen, are affected. So we cannot rely anymore on one tree species and assume that this tree species is safe or secure for the future. So spruce is damaged on large areas. Oak is vulnerable already since a long time. Beech recently was damaged as a consequence of the multiple drought events in 2018, 19, and 20. And also pine is somewhat vulnerable. We see several pine stands in southern Brandenburg, and we know it from other areas such as the Alpine valleys in Switzerland, that pine is declining. Scots pine, you know, one of the 111 pine tree species we have in the world, Scots pine, Pinus sylvestris. Okay, what about the state of our forests? Our forests still have some monoculture, so we have some legacies of the past, you know, forest history. I will tell you some details later. Forest history is responsible for some legacies of the past in terms of monocultures or pure stands, homogeneous stands, but we have already done some forest conversion in the last 20, 30 years. So we have 75% of mixed forests in Germany, not often very intensively mixed, so maybe 2 or 3 species. It's a starting point, but it's not enough, of course. And we have already a share of 80% of natural regeneration in the young stands or in the next generation of our forests. We have some 20 cubic meters of deadwood in our stands on average in Germany, which is also a beginning, yeah? It's not enough in terms of biodiversity conservation, and we have to go on that. So many areas have still to be converted in the next decades. That is our task. So I will talk about in this lecture first the diversity of our forests. So I will take you to a journey into northeastern Germany and show some forest types. Then we go to silvicultural systems, and we will talk about maybe the most promising and important concept of forestry or silviculture, which is the continuous cover forestry approach or concept. And after that, if we have time, I go a little bit on site-adapted forestry because it has some tradition at Eberswalde and some aspects of silvicultural management. You may know thinning, tending, and production strategies, etc. All right, so please accompany me through a journey in northeastern Germany. So we focus a little bit on our region because Germany is too large for one lecture to explain or to be explained. And our forest landscape is dominated by pine stands here in the northeast. You can see it driving from Berlin airport to the city or to the surroundings. You see a lot of pine stands, Scots pine, and sometimes still pure stands or with a kind of understory of broad-leaved tree species, which is already a consequence of some conversion activities. Pine stands are regenerated by shelterwood cutting. You see a shelterwood stand, so a homogeneously opened stand for regeneration on the left side. And pine has also a long tradition here in the northeast or in the former German Democratic Republic because it was used for a non-timber forest product, for resin. And you see a pine tree on the right side with the typical marks of resin extraction, which immediately stopped when the German Democratic Republic died, so to speak. Yeah? And then this was abandoned, but you can see it's still in our forest. So pine is very important here in the Northeast, but we also have broadleafed stands, of course. So we have nice and wonderful beech stands here in the so-called end moraine zone near Eberswalde. And this forest, the forest of Korin, was highlighted as the forest of the year 2023 in Germany this year, due to its beauty, due to its naturalness, but also due to its vulnerability. We have to care about these broadleafed stands. They show a lot of structural elements, which is important in close-to-nature forestry. They show stand legacies from the former stand, so deadwood, snags, and coarse woody debris. So they are very important models for sustainable and near-natural forest development. Yeah? And very often the foresters today, they focus on specific trees with microhabitats and with structural elements, dying trees for biodiversity purposes. So the question of biodiversity is very important today. It became important in the last 20, 30 years. And we try with our silvicultural concepts, we try to reconcile production aspects or production goals with biodiversity goals and aspects. We will come to that. We have oaks. So pine, 70% in the Northeast, beech 6-7%, and oak 5-6%. So we have oak trees, and oak, ladies and gentlemen, in Germany has a long history because it was propagated due to forest history, due to coppicing, for example, or due to agroforestry systems we had in the past. So in the past, we had grazing of animals in our forests, and they, of course, ate the mast, so the acorns of the oak, which was very important for the rural areas. So oak was pushed, and oak has to be managed because oak is in danger due to the high competition of beech. We are in a beech country. Germany would be covered if human intervention would immediately stop now, theoretically. Germany would be covered 80-85% with beech. So beech is at the moment in our current climate a very competitive species and would outcompete nearly all the other tree species. So oak has to be managed in order to be retained. Then we have specific forest types due to the site conditions. Yeah? Very wet sites south of Berlin, it's called the Spreewald region. Peatlands where we have alder, Alnus glutinosa, stands, so a valuable broadleaf tree species, which is very nice to see in these nature conservation areas. Very often they are not managed, it's just for nature protection. Yeah? So the peatland forests on 2 or 3% in Brandenburg. And then, folks, we have exotic tree species in Germany since 150 years. So we have especially Douglas fir, is a North American species, you know, and came to Germany in the 19th century and was planted for productivity reasons, sometimes also for aesthetic reasons, and enriched our forests already, sometimes with a share of 1 or 2% in the Northeast. In southwestern Germany, where I come from, it's 5 to 6% already. So exotic, quite fast-growing tree species are an element already in our forests, and they are debated at the moment. Their role is questioned because nature conservationists, they say they cannot be a component of a resilient forest, and others, like me, I say to a small extent they can be, yeah? And we will see in the next minutes. And then we have a special situation in Brandenburg, which is the relevance of restoration. So restoration is a very important topic in many of your countries. forest landscape restoration. You know, UN has declared the decade of 2020 to 2030 as the decade of forest restoration. And we have some classical forest restoration in the open lignite mine areas, in Brandenburg, which are traditionally restored by a diverse range of species, by pine, but also birch or oak or alder species. And more and more in Germany, we are talking about restoring our forests, also apart from these typical post-mining areas. We say that our damaged forests have to be restored into resilient forests with a higher adaptive capacity. So restoration has arrived in Germany and is an important topic. And the Ministry of Environment recently has put 4 billion euros as subsidies or potential subsidies, incentives for restoration measures in Germany, not only in forests, also mires or peatlands. So it has arrived and is a relevant topic now. But a relevant topic is also disturbances. Disturbances and more frequent disturbances are more and more shaping our forests. This is a picture just outside here from the forest campus. And you can see we can easily go with our students just in 1 minute to the forest and have exercises and have excursions. So quite a good advantage of Eberswalde. And we have storm damages, more and more storm damages, but also biotic damages. This is a pine stand which was completely destroyed or damaged by a caterpillar. And we have also fire. Recently, the large fires in South Berlin, but also in other parts of Eastern Germany, mostly, sometimes also due to problems of ammunition. Yeah? So that is the increasing fire problem. So forest disturbances are shaping our forests. In the past, many silviculturists, they often wanted to avoid disturbances or to cope with disturbances. Yeah? But today we have more and more convictions that disturbances should be integrated in our silvicultural models. And there are some promising silvicultural concepts coming from North America. For example, disturbance-based forest management, it's called. Integrating disturbances or emulating disturbances in the silvicultural concepts. Okay, some words on Eberswalde as a higher education site for forestry. Our president already mentioned it. So we are going back to 1830 when Wilhelm Leopold Pfeil was nominated the first director of this school. And one landmark which I want to tell you is that at this place in Eberswalde, in this small northeastern German town, the leading forest research network of the world, IUFRO, you may have heard, the International Union of Forest Research Organizations, was founded in Eberswalde. Yeah? In 1892, of course, this was near the capital Berlin, which was helpful. And here, one of the largest forest research institute at that time was situated. So the former Prussian Forest Research Institute. So IUFRO as the leading network, which was at the beginning more a network of German-speaking institutions in Switzerland and Austria and Germany, but then enlarged in the 20th century to really the leading network of forest research institutions. And next year, there's the IUFRO World Congress at Stockholm, Sweden. Okay, let's go into silviculture, which is my topic. And I want to make you familiar or discuss with you some basic silvicultural systems, some approaches, but also the developments, what was in the past and what are the new developments, where should we go to. And just to remind you, the silvicultural system is the whole program of silvicultural treatment, which extends throughout the lifetime of a whole stand. And we distinguish between high forest systems, that is seed germination, forest establishment by seed germination, and coppice forest systems, which means the vegetative regeneration of trees, via sprouts or root suckers, for example. And within the high forest system category, we have two directions: the very famous even-aged forests, which have a certain fame, of course, a negative fame, and the uneven-aged or the continuous cover forests. And we will talk a little bit about these systems, and especially about the uneven-aged or continuous cover system. Look at the systems as a whole. You can see first the even-aged systems, and of course, we have a long history of clear cutting. I think all over the world, especially also in Central Europe. Clear cutting was the regeneration policy until the 1970s and 80s in West Germany, but also in East Germany, especially in the GDR. Large clear cuts were practiced for the regeneration of these pure pine stands. Large clear cuts in Germany means 30, 40 hectares. In some other countries, this might be smaller. So clear cutting, here you can see a clear cut, but in many forest laws today, clear cuts are restricted and should be avoided. So the silvicultural prescriptions, they are in the direction to avoid clear cutting, or to just allow it in exceptions if a stand conversion, for example, is necessary. So the clear cut, and another type of clear cut is the strip cut. And look at this forest landscape. This is from the surroundings of Freiburg, so the mountainous areas in the Black Forest. And you can see this is a window into forest history if you look at these stands. You can see, for example, a nice old beech or broadleaf mixed stand here in the middle. And you can see younger conifer stands. And what happened is a history of strip cutting from the right to the left, and the beech stand, the heterogeneous mixed beech stand with silver fir, with maple, was converted into pure conifer stands. That was the history until 1970. So we have a history of conversion into conifer forest landscapes. In the Middle Ages in Germany, we had 2/3 broadleaves and 1/3 conifers. And in 1913, to name a date, we had the situation vice versa. So we had 2/3 of conifers and 1/3 of broadleaf trees. So we have this conversion history into these monospecific, mostly conifer stands, and today we are going the way back, or we try at least, and that is called forest conversion. Okay, that's a strip cut. And just to show you one thing, just briefly, why Germany has so many forest landscapes with pure spruce stands or pine stands. This is due to the model of the regular forest. And I have heard you will visit Tarant, and this was invented, so to speak, in Tarant. In the 19th century, this was a model, economically driven model, because the decision criteria, as you can read, was the highest internal rate of return. And that meant to achieve that was a reduction of the rotation period and the plantation of fast-growing tree species, which was mostly Norway spruce. So that is one reason, so one economic reason why we have so many legacies of pure spruce stands in Germany. It's the economic model of the so-called land expectation theory, Bodenreinertragslehre for the Germans. Okay. And last summer I hiked at the Thüringer Wald, yeah? And you can see that's another damaged area. You can see the damaged spruce stand. So that is a long history of legacies of even-aged forestry, of pure stands, which nowadays these ecosystems came at a kind of tipping point, yeah? And have to be converted into more resilient and mixed forests. And how this will be done, we will discuss. All right, but we go to a more promising, a more close to nature or closer to nature silvicultural system. Look at this. This is from Korin, not far from here, so 10 kilometers. You can see a patch of regeneration, of natural regeneration of beech, European beech. So the most dominant and competitive species we have here. And this is a so-called irregular shelterwood method. This is not a method to establish even-aged pure stands. It's a method to establish uneven-aged stand, at least the beginning of uneven-agedness, and to establish mixed forests. Yeah? And you can see the irregular shelterwood here on the right side of the more uneven-aged silvicultural systems. The system is already 100 or more years old, but it was not practiced, you know. The mainstream forestry in Germany was even-aged high forests with clear cuts. And continuous cover forestry was a very small development line, and I will give you some more information on that. So the irregular shelterwood cutting, look at the scheme. You may have seen this in your lectures, of course, or you know it. You see, you start irregularly on patches, or you have natural regeneration on patches. You leave most of the stand closed, and then you enlarge the patches. And finally, you have a more uneven aged, at least 20, 30, 40 years stand, which is already characterized by a kind of structural diversity. That is our intention, to increase structural diversity, species diversity in our stands. Internationally, this has to be put into the framework of retention forestry. You can see on this figure that a clear cut, of course, should be on the right side, where you have a retention of 0%, or maybe a very small retention of maybe a seed tree or something like that. And the irregular shelterwood cutting is somewhat here near 50, 60, 70% of retention. What does that mean? Retention means our focus as silviculturists, as forest ecosystem managers, is not on the trees to be removed, but on the trees to be retained in a stand. Yeah? That's a fundamental shift, which was done or practiced on a larger area at the end of the 20th century, yeah? And not before. Before we had the focus on the trees to be removed in terms of clear cutting, strip cutting, or something like that, yeah? And then the focus shifted also in North America. In North America and the US and Canada, this principle was introduced under the framework or umbrella of ecosystem management. And they changed their policy completely from clear cutting and introduced this retention forestry under ecosystem management since 20, 30 years. Yeah? And now we come to this famous selection forest. You have seen the last uneven-aged forest on the right side here. So the archetype of an uneven-aged forest, the selection forest. The selection forest is something special. It already developed since 200 years in the mountainous areas of Central Europe, so in Switzerland, Slovenia, Germany, maybe Eastern France. And it's characterized by a specific tree species composition, silver fir, Norway spruce, and maybe some beech. And it's characterized by the uneven agedness, the mixture of different sizes and ages on a small area, on a small location. So it's a truly uneven age stand, yeah? A forest. And that's the selection forest. And you can characterize it by the so-called negative J-shape diameter distribution curve. You know it from forest measurements. You know this, this characterization, the J-shaped diameter distribution curve. You have a lot of small trees in this stand. You have some medium-sized trees, and you have just a few large trees on the same location, on a small area. Yeah, that's the feature of a selection forest. And look at the selection forest on the right side. I took this picture during an excursion in Switzerland, in the Alpine region, where you see silver firs, the umbrella-shaped crown tree, and Norway spruce. And you see an intimate mixture. You see large trees and small trees. And very important, you must have shade-tolerant tree species in this system. So species which are able to be tolerant against shade. Yeah. So one important species in this respect is silver fir. Silver fir tolerates shade, and you can analyze it. Sometimes you find small silver firs with this dimension at breast height, and the tree has 50, 60, or 100 years. Yeah, so it's 100-year-old. So it was able to survive in the understory, in the shady understory of a stand. And then when there is a release of a large tree, the tree can use this light and start growing, really start growing. And that is the shade tolerance of the species, which is essential here. So that is the selection forest. You see, we have a large gradient between clear cutting and single tree mixtures and single tree interventions in selection forests. And selection forests, of course, are important types of continuous cover forest. So again, look at this gradient in silviculture. We can work in silviculture in all countries with this gradient. I saw intensive silvicultural systems in Brazil, for example, agroforests in South Brazil with acacia tree species, plantation forests with eucalypt and pines, so the southern pines from the US, Pinus taeda, Pinus eliotii. And of course, we know diverse, more or less primary forests, some still existing in Eastern Europe, for example, in Ukraine, some beech primeval forests, and we have something in between. And what do you think, where are the German forests located in this gradient? What do you think? Where should we put the German forests in this gradient? Yeah, that is, yeah, please, some ideas, some brainstorming. Where are the German forests? More on the right side, in the intensive corner, or more on the left side? What do you mean? Here, I think here are the German forests, yeah? So we have these legacies of plantations still. We see it around. We have the pure spruce stands in Bavaria, and we have the pure pine stands here in Brandenburg, but we already have some close to nature forests. We have forests with natural regeneration, with some structural diversity. So we are already on the left side, but we have still a long way to go, yeah, for adapting or further adapting our forests. So that means these continuous cover forests, these structured forests, the mixed forests, they are a promising model for further developing forestry in times of climate change. And CCF is defined as those silvicultural systems which involve continuous and uninterrupted maintenance of the forest cover. Yeah, I think it's quite common for you. And they avoid clear cutting. That's the continuous cover forestry. And it has also to do with Eberswalde. And that is the point why I emphasize this so long because 100 years ago we had a professor for silviculture and also mycology, Alfred Möller, who invented or developed the concept of Dauerwald. In German it's Dauerwald, but internationally we call it continuous cover forestry. He came back from Brazil because he had a study period in the South Brazilian subtropical forests, and he saw the heterogeneous forests and the richness, the structural richness of these forests. And then he came back to Prussia at that time and saw the deserts of pine forests here, the homogeneity. And he started to develop this new model of an ecosystem which is heterogeneous, which belongs together, the components. We have to also consider the soil conditions, the mycorrhiza, etc. All these things we today quite are aware of. And then he developed this concept, which is Dauerwald. And there's also a movement in Germany, a movement or an association of small-scale forest enterprises, private forest enterprises. You remember 50% are private forests. They are committed to Dauerwald or to continuous cover forestry. They are called ANW, forest enterprises. We have a student group also engaged in ANW here at Eberswalde. And they have already since decades worked with this model, but they were only a small group, and the mainstream forestry was still H-class forestry. But the development line goes back until the beginning of the 20th century. Continuous cover forestry, Alfred Möller. And that is some consequences of this mainstream forest development. Look at a typical spruce stand, which I found in Thüringen, the Thüringer Wald, so a mountainous area, damaged by deer, by the way. So this is a stand, you see the damages here, completely piled by deers, peeled by deers. It's peeled by deer, and of course to 100% damaged. That is another problem we have in our forests. We have still too high deer populations. But that is the legacy of this forest history on 80-90% of our area. It's the even-aged, pure high forest. And since 2030 or a little bit more years, a large effort, a great effort of forest conversion started in the Western German countries and in the East, because the people were aware that we cannot go further with these homogeneous stands. They are vulnerable, they are fragile. There was Waldsterben or forest decline 1.0 in Germany in the 1980s. There were damages, storm damages and insect damages a lot. So they thought we should go back to these ideas which still exist of continuous cover forestry and try to work with more diverse forests in the future. And a great effort of forest conversion started around 1980, and you see the spruce stands now are mixed with beeches. This is a picture from the Harz near Göttingen, where you go next week. So the underplanting, we call it underplanting of beech into pure spruce stands, which is a successful technique to convert these pure spruce stands. That is forest conversion. Just to show you an example how underplanting is working, a little bit of silvicultural technology, so applied silviculture of the lecture I'm giving. And you can see, you can, for example, establish 3 groups of beech in a hectare of spruce. 3 groups of beech and maybe 1 group of silver fir, another shade-tolerant and promising admixed tree species. You do it in a spacing of 2 by 2, maybe. The groups are 0.1 hectares. Then you protect it with fences, which is sometimes necessary still. You have the costs for the protection with fences, and maybe you have a slight soil scarification, maybe or not. Yeah. So what are the costs for underplanting this 3 or 4 groups? It's around 6,000 euros or dollars. Yeah. So you see, it's quite an investment. That means forest conversion means investing in the future, taking money, actively managing and steering or manipulating our forests. Especially private forest owners, you can imagine this, sometimes may not afford this. So there is another important justification, of course, for subsidies and financial incentives. I go not into detail here because I'm not the expert for that, but forest conversion, of course, is subsidized by funds in Germany for the private forest owners. One important point I want to highlight, of course, is this question of deer populations and the success of continuous cover forestry and the natural regeneration in our forests is depending to a large extent on the deer populations and on the ecologically compatible deer populations. Look at this control fence. This is called control fence. You see within the fence a large vegetation, yeah? A vital or vigorous vegetation with tree species, but also herbaceous vegetation. And you see outside the fence a completely grazed area by the deer, you know. So that means we won't have success with our forest conversion, with establishing climate smart forests or climate resilient forests without solving this deer problem. But that's again another story. Maybe you have time to discuss this in Göttingen or somewhere with other colleagues. So efficient hunting strategies and hunting policy. So the essentials of continuous cover forestry, ladies and gentlemen, can be summarized like this. You see, continuous cover forestry is not a single isolated silvicultural system such as clear cut or shelterwood cut, but it's a compilation of many things. It has to do with the reintroduction of natural tree species such as the broadleaves in Germany, so beech and oak, and the valuable broadleaves such as maple or other more rare native tree species. It has to do with mixed stands in general. So the mixture is important. And I think the next speaker, Andreas Bolte, who will come, he will elaborate a little bit more on the question of mixture functional diversity as a key concept to make our forests more resilient in the future. So mixtures is important. And no clear cut if possible, yeah? Promotion of natural regeneration. And then, that is a conviction, or my conviction, I think we should tend and manage our forests. So I'm not advocating to set our forests completely aside, because these continuous cover forests and the continuous natural regeneration, they are depending on light. So the trees must germinate and develop. They are depending on not too high standing volumes, so we must reduce the standing volumes. We must bring light into the forests. So I think management is necessary to establish and maintain continuous cover forests. That is a conflict with nature conservation sometimes, and but we have solutions for that. It's a partly segregative approach when we say we do continuous cover forestry, for example, on 80 or 90% of the area in a forest enterprise, and 10 or 15% of the forests are set aside or are completely or totally protected. That's a compromise, I think, which is viable, and we should go in that. So it's a broad approach, and I think maybe the most promising approach on stand level for future resilient stands, yeah? The continuous cover forestry. And if you look at silvicultural strategies or prescriptions in Germany or in other countries around, you will find continuous cover forestry as the recommended model. You will find it nearly everywhere. So everybody wants to abandon clear cut as far as possible and go to continuous cover forestry. So it's maybe the most promising model on stand level. And I just show you a few pictures. Again, relax and look at the pictures. So the mixture is important. And the functional diversity of a mixed stand. If you increase the species diversity from 1 to 3, 4, or 5, you already do maybe 80% of the work, because this mixture is already stabilizing your forests in terms of resistance and resilience. There are a lot of studies and also big meta-studies showing that species richness is important. Here, just an insight into different types of mixtures. That is silviculture and applied silviculture. You learn it everywhere when you study forestry. To admix a stand with tree species at the same time, so to have equal mixtures, or to underplant maybe some years later and use these trainer, so-called trainer tree species to improve the soil conditions, or to train the overstory trees to develop more in qualitatively well-developed trees, or to use nurse crops to start on an open area or on a damaged area with a so-called nurse crop, yeah? To cover the area, yeah? And then to think about the target tree species and plant them or wait for them under the nurse crop. Yeah? Or in terms of spatial pattern, what you can see very often, and if you go out, if you have excursions, and you will in the next 2 weeks, you see quite often the spatial mixture in terms of small monospecific patches or cells. And you won't very often see intimate mixtures, so mixtures one by one, because this requires a high tending effort, a high management effort to keep the mixture. But you will see small groups of admixed tree species in a stand, and these patches can be well or easily tended. Yeah? That is the policy in nearly all the German countries or federal countries, and also with the private forest enterprises. A stable permanent mixture you can see here with large beech, or on the right side with exotic tree species. A wonderful stand I saw during an excursion last year in the Black Forest. You see Douglas firs with 1 meter of diameter at breast height and 60 meters height, which is record in Germany. So the highest tree in Germany is 70 meters. It's a Douglas fir near Freiburg. Yeah? And this stand, by the way, on the right side, with Douglas fir, with hemlock, and with grand fir, this compartment is called there Little America. Okay, so mixture trees with service functions. We have it in the oak production system. This is near Eberswalde here with our students a few years ago. And you see the oak tree, and you see all the smaller trees around are the trainer trees, so beech or hornbeam, which are important for the oak, so that there is a shading component, there is a provision of leaves for the humus, yeah, so that the soil will be improved, but mostly the shading issue, so that epicormic branches at the oak can be avoided. You know, lateral branches, which normally, if they occur, oak cannot be sold as a valuable timber for veneer production, for example. Yeah. So that is trainer tree species or nurse crops, the aspen on the burned area south of Berlin, the large forest fire south of Berlin, and our research group under the guidance of Pierre Ibisch from our university is investigating many aspects of the reforestation of these large burned areas. Okay, group mixtures, again, you see the patches. That is very often the case, and you will find a lot of stand with a patchy structure at the end. Yeah? Mixed trees in a patchy structure, which is the best compromise. And sometimes we find also these fine or intimate single mixtures. This is a stand I found in an ANW forest enterprise in North Rhine-Westphalia near Düsseldorf, where you can see, and that is a kind of exception in Germany, broad-leafed stands with 15 different tree species. For some of you, this is not much, because you have a higher diversity of tree species, maybe several hundreds on a hectare in tropical, subtropical countries, but for Germany, it's a lot. Yeah? Normally, we work with 1, 2, 3, 4 different tree species on one area, and here we have quite a large tree species richness with 15, sometimes quite rare broadleaf tree species, such as the wild service tree, for the Germans, Elsbeere, yeah, a valuable broadleaf tree. I will skip this and go to natural regeneration is the preferred regeneration in CCF systems. So we let nature work and provide regeneration and the next stand generation with many, many advantages also for adaptation. Because if you have a long-term natural regeneration, you have the highest probability for a high genetic diversity in a stand, which is a precondition for adaptation. Yeah? Okay, Scots pine. I already explained the role of Scots pine, and I come to one second last thing of continuous cover forestry, which is it is a forest management system referring to the reduction of the impact of logging. Yeah? So reduced impact logging system. We know it from the tropics. There is an emphasis on that to reduce the impact if we harvest one large tree in a tropical forest, so that not other trees are also uprooted with this harvest. So to reduce the damages, and we lay an emphasis on that also here in Germany in our CCF systems. And one important thing is good harvesting concepts, of course, machines, adequate machines, but we have skidding lines in our forests. Every 40 meters, today it came from 20, we have a skidding line. So the drive over on the forest sole is only allowed on the skidding line. That means we may have 10, 12% of the forest area is impacted or is compacted at the end. Yeah? It's a compromise so that management is still possible, but with a reduction of the consequences for ecosystem integrity. And the last point is here, what we also do in continuous cover systems, we emulate some elements or attributes of primary forests. And the most important are deadwood. So deadwood was no topic 30 years ago, but today deadwood and habitat trees, so living trees but with defects, but microstructures for biodiversity are very important. They are prescribed in every silvicultural system today in Germany. So the retention of stand legacies from the former stand, which helps to build a bridge of continuity between the stands and don't interrupt completely the stand history. That is an important element where we do not completely simulate or emulate primary forests, of course, but some elements at least, yeah? Okay, and as I told you, we manage these forests. So even planter forests, the selection forests have to be managed. Otherwise, if the standing volumes of stands are increasing, the probability of natural regeneration is decreasing. Yeah? And if you have a good mixture in a stand, maybe 10 species, if you don't manage the stand, if you don't care about the mixture, you will lose at mixed tree species. Maybe at the end, just beech. Beech is surviving because it's so competitive. And that is something we don't want to have. Okay, the relevance of thinning. And then we can, and I come slowly to the end now, we can produce, and that is a competitive advantage still, I think, in Central Europe, valuable trees. You can see some valuable broadleaf trees presented in a kind of auction here near Eberswalde in Korin. So they are presented for the buyers, isolated logs. Yeah? Normally the trees are, the logs, the timber is sold in the forest, but this is an auction where the valuable trees are presented for the potential buyers. They come and they bid for the trees. Maybe they say a valuable oak. I assume 1,000 euros, or valuable more, yeah, even more, or valuable maple 10,000 euros are prices which were generated in the last year. So that is the production of valuable timber, and that leads us at the end of the presentation now to a few silvicultural management aspects. I now explained to you briefly the silvicultural systems, but now some basic silvicultural management aspects, which might be helpful for the next 2 weeks. And one thing is, here you can see the whole sequence of silvicultural practices. And one important thing has to do with regeneration, and that is the central or fundamental issue of site-adapted forestry. Everywhere in the world, if you work in forestry, you will emphasize this principle. Forestry is site-specific, so you have to screen the sites, you have to match the species requirements with the site conditions. And this is also already due, this is already valid for a long time. So this started here in Germany already in the 19th century with Pfeil in 1830. And site-adapted tree species, they can develop their growth potential. So you will see on a suited site, you will see a well-growing tree or well-growing trees. You will see a self-regulation of the stands, and you will see that the site conditions are not deteriorated on a long term. And what we have, for example, in our history with the spruces, we can show that after 2 or 3 generations of spruce on a site, on one location, you have a deterioration or a declining site in terms of acidification, for example, and nutrient loss. So an important requirement of site-adapted forestry is to maintain the site conditions stable. Yeah? All right, site-adapted forestry is important, and for that you need an ecological site classification model. And nearly all the models I know have 2 levels. They have a regional level, which is oriented at topographic or landscape elements or the regional climate, and they have a local level of typical sites, yeah, or typical soils. And that is also the case in Brandenburg. You can see a little bit of a site map. All the foresters here, they have their site mapping information on maps or even digital today, and they can use this information for tree species selection. I will not go into this model, but I will show you still an approach, a silvicultural approach, which is helpful and can be applied everywhere for high-value timber production. So you can apply this for, as in the picture, valuable Douglas fir. You can apply it for broadleaf tree species. You can apply it for teak in Venezuela or Brazil. You can apply it for Chinese fir, maybe in China. Yeah? It's the two-stage or two-phase strategy for high-value timber production. And it goes like this. You have two stages, one after the other. In a first stage, you focus on quality. That is normally in dense stands, yeah, where you use the process of natural pruning due to the density of the tree, so the branches will die and fall down, or you artificially prune, and then you will have trees with a branch-free log, at least in the first meters. Yeah? That is the quality aspect, because quality, high-quality trees or timber has to do with branchiness, yeah? Logs free from branches, yeah? Branch-free timber. And then the second point is diameter acceleration. And this is done via release or thinning. So you thin selected trees in a stand, future crop trees, we call them, for enhancing the dimension or for improving the diameter growth, so that at the end you will have thick trees with at least some meters of branch-free timber, yeah, of branch-free wood. All right, I already mentioned a lot about thinning, ladies and gentlemen. I think that managing is important, and we should have this integration in our approach, with this exception that we can, of course, set aside some areas for specific goals, for example, for biodiversity conservation. Some 10 or 15%, I think, are absolutely feasible, so that we can provide or can maintain this forest habitat continuity. A big topic, of course, is climate smart forestry, and I should have another hour or 2 or 3 or 5 hours to go with you in that topic. But this will be, I think, part of the lecture of Andreas Bolte, who is coming later, or the next speaker. So starting from forest decline 1.0 in the Harz Mountains, some pictures from the 1980s when I was a student on excursions with my professor, and how we can make our forests today more resilient within our approaches we have. Is that sufficient, or do we need adaptations of continuous cover forestry? Do we need new elements? That is, of course, a very interesting question, and a lot of people are working on that, are doing research on that, and that will be another talk and other discussions. Maybe in our discussion we can talk about that. For the first moment, I want to thank you very much for your interest and for your patience. And this is not Germany, of course. As you can see, this was my last holidays in Italy. A wonderful, I think the English name of Platanus is plane tree. I hope so. And this was at a North Italian lake. So thank you very much.
So I don't know if you have planned discussion or question, and we have still 25 minutes if there's a demand here. So yeah, first of all, thank you very much for this amazing presentation. And so the microphone is coming to the people who have raised their hand. And also, is somebody online to see if there is a question? Are you online or? Okay. It's okay. You want to say something or are you online? Okay. Okay. Do you have the streaming questions in front of you?
If there are, yes, but at the moment there is no one. Can someone else run with the microphone?
Who was first?
Hello, hello. Okay. Thank you, Professor, for your very great presentation. I'm Rizka from Indonesia, and you talk about the even age plantation, which actually I was attending the Forest Dialogue 2023 in Pekanbaru and talk about the tree plantation as well to support the sustainable landscape. And then I'm curious about something that I'd like to ask later on. I have three questions actually. And the first one, how do even age plantation help to achieve national targets for peatland restoration? Since I saw before in your presentation, there are a even age plantation growth in the peatland restoration. So how do even age plantation help to achieve national targets for peatland restorations, reforestations, fire reductions, and deforestation mitigation? That's my first question. Yeah, the fire reduction. So to decrease the fire reduction. And my second question is, how do even age plantation contribute to create sustainable livelihood in Germany? Because of, yeah, I don't even know is it or not, but in Indonesia, even age plantation really help to for the community to help their economic and also for sustain life. And my third question, my last question, sorry, ladies and gentlemen, this is a kind of little hard question for me, and hopefully you could answer it very well. How should even age plantation better support the implementation of the remedy framework IFSC, Forest Stewardship Council, and the new EU deforestation policy? Okay, I thank you.
Micro here. Yes, okay, yeah. Okay, I leave it. Thank you. So very complex questions. Maybe I start with the economic question and the contribution to livelihoods. I mean, you know, we have different forest ownerships. I said 50% are private forest owners, 25 are state-owned, so the Länder, German federal states, and some 25 or a little bit less community-based or city-based forests. And we have different goals and strategies with the forest in these different ownerships. For example, you can find private forest owners, for example, farms in the Black Bavarian forest. They want to have a liquidity or an income from forestry. Yeah, maybe several thousand euros per year. They depend on that. Maybe they have agriculture additionally, but they have also. And then you have very small scale private forest owners, maybe several hundred thousands in Germany, 2 hectares or 5 hectares or 0.5 hectares. They sometimes do not even know where their forest area is located. They don't have absolutely any economic objective with their forests. So no contribution of the forest to livelihood aspects. And then we have cities, and I just take a city such as Göttingen, for example. You will visit Göttingen, is a university city. So, and Göttingen has a city forest with 1,600 hectares, which is not much. But the city forest of Göttingen is very much committed to a continuous cover forest model like this, like we presented. And they have reduced the importance of economics in their goal system. So they do not want to have from their forest team, for example, positive revenues. They say, okay, you must work according to economic principles. Yeah? But if you have a deficit at the end of the year, it's okay. We accept this because you provide us a wonderfully mixed and close to nature forest. So that means, again, no significant or relevant contribution to the city budget of Göttingen, yeah, of the forest. And so we have to go through, and the Länder, the German federal states, for example, of course, you can imagine the contribution of forestry in a state such as Baden-Württemberg, maybe with several billions of euros of budget, the contribution of the federal state forest is very small, and they do not require a positive result or financial statement. But this is a new development. This was different 30 years ago. And if you go to forest history, you find analyses that maybe 100 years ago, or even 200 years ago, the state forest contributed with 50 or 70% to the state budget. This was in the times before the German Reich, yeah? So before 1871 or so. So you see, this has changed, and the economic dimension or the economic relevance of forestry has declined as a kind of synthesis. Okay, that was the first question. Then peatland. And so peatland in Germany is different of peatland in Indonesia, as you can imagine. So we have, of course, peatlands, but we have a lot of drained peatlands, former peatlands. And we have some nice peatlands. I showed you the alder stand. You can see it here, alder in peatland forest. These are nice nature conservation areas, Naturschutzgebiete. But the drained peatlands today, they are agricultural area or they are normal forest. And the intention is, especially with the help of this new law or this initiative of the environmental ministry in Germany, to re-wet the former peatlands. So to bring back water into the landscape in terms of to improve the carbon storage of these peatlands, in terms of biodiversity conservation, etc. So we will go back and revert or convert these drained peatlands in Germany in the next decades. And there was a last question.
The last question is about how should even a plantation support the implementation of the remedy to the forest or to the new European Union deforestation policy.
Again, I missed some or two words, so I couldn't get your point. So the even-aged forests, yeah? Or plantations?
Support the remedy to framework of Forestry Stewardship Council, FSC. And then also beside the FSC, how should even-age plantation support the new European Union deforestation policy? Yeah.
Okay, so you you go quite into forest policy, which is not my expertise, but I think FSC, if you look what is happening in Germany, so the plantation principle in FSC is not so relevant for Germany. So this is, I think, the principle 10. You have the international principles, but every country interprets the principles differently and has a slightly different approach with respect to FSC. So if you look at the situation here in Eastern Germany, FSC certification is expanding from, I would say, committed private forest enterprises, for example, in the context of A&W, of the continuous cover forestry people, expands into the state forest enterprises. So Brandenburg, for example, or Saxony, They want to let their forest be certified now, this year or next year, by FSC, because they think FSC will, or FSC certification will document better that we are managing our forests according to this close to nature approach, yeah? With structural diversity, mixture, keeping the skidding lines 40 meters distant, etc. All these things FSC is requiring. Yeah? FSC is a good standard, yeah? Here in Central Europe, and more forest enterprises want to go into this direction. You know, also because in many governments on forest state level, the Green Party is participating since a few years in Germany. And the Green ministers, they often want to have this as a nice policy result. Yeah. Okay, your questions. Other questions?
Were maybe 1, 2, 3.
Okay, wait, no. Me. Thank you. Oh. Okay. So what? I want to ask about. I see the report from the Ministry of Forestry in Germany. It states that peatlands only like cover 5% of the total forest in Germany, and 97% of it has been converted to another type of forest and agriculture. So I want to ask, like, how Germany manage with this ecological succession while change from the peatlands into another forest, like the primary and the secondary succession, and how you manage that without losing, we manage the disturbance while changing, while converting the type of the forest. Thank you. To another forest types, and then so how you manage that, because it seems like there will be many disturbance for this. Yeah.
Landscape, yeah? And at the end, you will have converted a humid soil or a wet soil type into a normal soil, yeah? with all the characteristics of a normal soil. And of course, the tree species which are suited on peatlands, this is a restricted number. This is alder, this is willow, yeah, this is some poplar tree species. And if you drain these areas, you can, of course, enhance the spectrum of tree species which are suited on these drained areas. Is that what you mean? So you can, on a drained area, you can plant spruce, yeah? But not, of course, on a wet area. Spruce is absolutely incompatible with peatlands in Germany, you know. But on a normal forest soil, which is not characterized by peat, yeah, anymore, you can have the possibility of a wide variety of species choices. Yeah? But you have a very restricted possibility on wet sites. Just 3 or 4 genera or genus, I mean genus or species. Yeah? So, you know, peatland, as a conclusion, peatland in Germany is just a rising topic. It has not been a topic such as in other countries, as in Indonesia or so. where you have huge tropical forest areas on peatlands. You have converted them into palm oil or something, and you have this issue very prominent. In Germany, we have the drained peatlands, which are normal sites today, and we now start to re-wet the landscape again because we see the significance of peatlands as carbon storage sites, the soil, but also the vegetation on them, and as important habitats for biodiversity conservation. Okay? Mm-hmm.
Hello. So here, I am here. In the so first of all, my name is Freddy Polo. I am from Peru, and thank you very much for your very well summarized presentation of the complexity of forestry in Germany. I am interested in two topics, like first policy and then restoration. So my first question will be about the very interesting story that you told us about how the reunification of Germany affected pine-related forestry, but maybe you can expand it a bit more about how this reunification affected the whole forestry sector on the former DDR. And my second question on restoration is about how the perception of restoration have changed especially on mining operations, because if I'm correct, they used to put some water there to avoid some pollution and so on, and now I see that they are planting trees. So yeah, if you can tell us a bit more about this. Thanks.
The history. That's right. Okay. The history of German unification in terms of forestry, of course, is complex. You know, the situation in East Germany in terms of the economic system, in terms of the real estate or property issue, and in terms of society was completely different. That is something you know from former socialist countries. But in terms of forest management, there were quite some similarities between East and West. There was H-class forestry, as I told you. There was the maximization of volume growth in East and in West. There was rationalization, machine use, and etc. Similar tendencies. Yeah. So the goal was on production or the focus was on production and efficiency. Yeah? And then after reunification, there were some convergence developments or converting developments. So also in Eastern Germany, the people knew about continuous cover forestry and the advantages of that. And they came back to this policy. So they were aware that mixed forests in the Erzgebirge, for example, should be the forest for the futures. Because in the Erzgebirge, so the mountainous area south of Dresden, yeah, where you go, there were huge damages of forest decline due to the power plants of the Czech Republic. Yeah? And the forest had to be restored again there with mixed stands. That was the conviction also of the Eastern German colleagues. So there was a convergence after reunification, but the societies and the economic systems were completely different during the division of the two Germanys. Yeah? But there were some partnerships between Western and East German federal states. For example, Baden-Württemberg supported a little bit Saxony, and North Rhine-Westphalia supported a little bit Brandenburg to overcome this division and to find a common ground after reunification. And then the restoration, okay, the restoration question. Again, with restoration, if you would have asked in Germany and in the forest community about restoration 10 or 20 years ago, nobody would have said this is a relevant issue or problem. So restoration was exclusively for rehabilitating mining areas, former mining areas. And of course, the mining companies they had the obligation by law to restore their disturbed and converted land. They have had the obligation to give back the land as it was before with a forest, yeah, at the end. So to replant on these disturbed areas after the coal was extracted, to replant a forest. Of course, not maybe the same forest as before, but a restoration according to the restoring the basic ecosystem functions. Yeah? That was obligation by law, but restoration in a broader sense was not relevant. It's starting now with the new policy in Germany, with the big program of the Environment Ministry, Mrs. Lemke. She provides 4 billion euros for restoration purposes. So for restoring formerly drained peatlands, for restoring maybe damaged other forest types, etc. But the program is not elaborated yet. The 4 billions, and if I'm informed correctly, 1 billion should go into forests, yeah, of these 4 billions. But the program is not yet elaborated in detail. So it's a starting point, and restoration will become more important even in Germany. Yeah? The restoration was a topic for tropical and subtropical countries. You know, the huge amount of degraded areas, which in Brazil, for example, is enormous. Maybe millions of hectares of land is degraded pastures, degraded mines also, and other land are a huge potential to be used again for forests. So the Bonn Challenge and the New York Declaration, you may know, so the plans to plant billions of trees in the next years on these degraded areas was something outside of Central Europe, I think. But it's coming back to our countries because we see that not only the sustainable management of forests is a relevant issue, and not only the conservation of forests is a relevant issue, but the third thing is restoration is becoming more and more relevant as issue because many of our forests are degraded. They have lost functions, maybe not the whole cover, but functions, and they should be restored in order to achieve all these climate goals, etc. Yeah?
Okay, we have still 2 questions left, and some little tests, so maybe
Short answers. Yep. Romania? Hmm?
And my question is also about restoration. Hello? Okay. Thank you for the word. My name is Raresh from Romania, and my question is also about restoration of the mining zones. Because yes, the restoration with pioneer species is logically because it's fast, but what about the soil? The soil is not going to be the same. They are going to also put shrubs or some other species that will restore also the soil for the future.
Okay, so a crucial point in this restoration of mining areas is the topsoil. And if you go back to the policy or the approach during the GDR times in Eastern Germany, there was no need to use exactly the topsoil. You took away from one side and bring it back to the other side and plant again the forest on a more natural soil structure. Yeah? This is new. This was done since 1990, or this was the obligation since 1990 that you, of course, must use the topsoil from the former forest for the reforestation and not the tertiary soil material or stone material from the mine. Of course, then you have a completely disturbed and unfertile soil where you cannot really develop a forest. But if you take the topsoil, and there are mechanisms and approaches to really take the topsoil with large iron bridges, maybe one of the largest machines humanity ever built, these large bridges over the mines. Yeah? The topsoil was brought from one side where it was taken away to the other side where the forest was re-established. That is a precondition, of course, for a good restoration of mining areas. Okay? Thank you. So maybe the last question. Here. Hi.
So, thank you so much, sir. My name is Hoyebolulafuni Joshua from Nigeria. Yes, Joshua, you've answered all my questions. So in the presentation, you were speaking about the current state of jamming of the forest. You mentioned monoculture and 70% of mixed forest. Yes, of 2 to 3 species. So my concern is the damages that have been caused on the forest came from fire, came from storm, and maybe some harvesting operations. I'm just curious that don't we have any other damage like pest and disease on the forest? Or is it because they don't have significant effects on the forest? So if we are trying to restore the forest, maybe planting or introducing 2 or 3 other species, won't there be an outbreak from, I don't know, over the years it has been maybe monoculture, so trying to incorporate other species, won't there be an outbreak of disease or pest from another? Yes, then I'm just trying to see ahead because we are securing the future ahead. What is the tendency? What can we do to prevent that? If there's a tendency of having an outbreak, a pest or disease outbreak in the future.
You mean how we can prevent future damages when we do reforestation with these species and with the native species and maybe the introduced tree species? Okay, that is maybe one of the central issues of building or developing climate resilient forests after these damages. So which tree species first you take, which mixtures, what is the function of each tree species, what is the risk for damage of each tree species, what are maybe the compensation effects between tree species. So I think the most important thing is to establish forests with a good functional diversity. So to bring together different tree species with respect to rooting, for example, shallow rooting with deep rooting, different tree species with respect to canopy closure, more light demanding tree species together with shade tolerant tree species, etc. So to have different or a high functional diversity so that if disturbances occur, and disturbances are very often species or age specific, that you have a distribution of the risk. Of course, you will have damages. You will have the probability, for example, recently I talked with a forest protection or a forest pathologist or protection expert. He said, of course, Peter, we will have more and more broadleaf tree species in Germany in the next decades due to the forest conversion of conifers into broadleaves. Of course, for sure, we will have more broadleafed specific insects and damages on broadleaves. We have to adapt to this. This is normal. We can have these insect species already here, so they develop and they increase in population size maybe, and we can import maybe some damaging agents or insects from other regions, but we will have it. So we will have disturbances in the future, but we have to reduce the risk for complete damage of a whole stand. Yeah? So that is one answer to your question, hopefully. It's okay. All right, so thank you very much again. It was excellent to be here, and I wish you a wonderful excursion and a stay in Germany in the different locations. And we will come back together on Friday next week when we have the final discussion. I will be there, and thank you very much. It was a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you again very much for your energy you put in this and all the valuable insights. We really appreciate this. Also, how you're helping us here. We have here something small, alcohol-free, made from wood taste, like oak, and our mug.
I prefer very much coffee.
Have a great day, and see you maybe tonight. Yeah. Okay, everyone, before you leave, because you're hungry, just a small note, don't use the toilets indicated for nursery or disabled people. Don't press any buttons, please. Further, the food is now outside in front of the Manda. We come back here at 1:30, okay? So be sure you did everything you need to in that break. See you.